listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. What day is it? It's Friday, the 2nd of June, and welcome to episode 20 of The Observing Eye. As always, I like to start these episodes with a brief moment of reflection. So, let's take a brief moment to think about the good things that have happened the past week. And now, a moment for the not so good. There we are. So, I hope you're all doing well. If you're new, welcome aboard. If you're returning, welcome back. I appreciate your business. This episode, I'm going to be talking about something called cognitive fluency. Not quite as complicated as it sounds. We're going to get a little bit psychological. We're going to throw some examples in, and I'm going to talk about how cognitive fluency can help us in our thinking and some ways in which you can potentially improve your own fluency of cognition. Now, you may not have heard of it before or come across it, which is entirely understandable. Like a lot of these psychology things, they can be a little off the radar. So, what is cognitive fluency then? So cognitive fluency is the ease with which our mind, our brains, process information, particularly new information. So a good example of this would be if you think of it in terms of a language. So the more fluent you are in a language, the easier it is for you to understand and speak and write in that language. Cognitive fluency works in a very, very similar way. But we cover all types of information that the brain can encounter. You probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that cognitive fluency forms a really integral part in a lot of advertising and marketing, and from a tech point of view, things like user experience design, user interfacing, that kind of stuff. I think we all know a fair few brands that use very sort of simple messaging and slogans to engender trust and to enable us to remember the products, to understand the brand. So things like Nike, just do it. Yeah, we know, just do it. We know that, we see it. And as soon as we hear that slogan, the mind goes, it's Nike. You literally can see that fabled tick in your mind. The same with like McDonald's, for example, the big, beautiful golden M that shines out like a beacon across vacant car parks in the early hours of the morning. Their slogan, again, very similar to Nike, very simple, very succinct, easy for us to remember. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Yeah, we all know that as well, don't we? So this is an idea around how branding and cognitive fluency work really well together. So we hear that thing, it's really simple. And the idea with cognitive fluency is that the mind will gravitate towards things that are easy for it to understand. And it's easy for us to remember and to recall stuff like that. When it's, when stuff sinks in easy, it comes back, it comes back into the mind easy as well. So there's an opposing faction here called cognitive disfluency. Now, cognitive disfluency, Kel Surprise, talks about the opposite effect, where things are overly complicated and don't gel well with us when we encounter them, and the mind struggles to understand them. Now, as a result of struggling to understand the concepts, to understand the information, because it isn't so readily relatable to us, to our experience, we have a tendency to distrust it. So another example in like marketing is, if you remember that little pandemic we had fairly recently, the UK government had a slogan initially on all of the podiums that the politicians and various health officials stood at, which was "Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives." Now, the initial one didn't resonate with people very well, and they didn't necessarily trust it, which meant they wouldn't adhere to it. So the slogan was changed to "Stay alert, control the virus, save lives." It's far more, for whatever reason, this was more resonating. It seemed to work better. It just rolled. It rolled better with people. And they trusted that more because there was more fluency to it. The information was easier to process. For whatever reason, the particular brand message initially didn't quite work, so it was changed afterwards. Another one would be like UK road signs. They were historically all presented in capital letters. And that wasn't quite what we expected because we're used to reading in proper case. So we have, capital letter first and the succeeding text in lower. So then the signs were changed to adopt the proper case, and it's enabled us to process the signs slightly faster, which is useful when you're traveling at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, whatever it is. So that is an example of how cognitive fluency, there you go, I can't even speak today, cognitive fluency comes into effect in things like marketing and information and how information is presented to us. So why is it important to understand cognitive fluency then? Well, it's a really interesting aspect of the way that our brains function. And unsurprisingly, it impacts our decision-making process and our overall cognition. So if we can try to improve our cognitive fluency, we can better navigate the information that is being thrown at us. And we all know that, today's modern age, the great dopamine culture, we are bombarded with information left, right, and center at every hour of the fucking day. So perhaps it will be an interesting thing to think about how we can manage all of that information that's being thrown at us in a slightly more efficient way, and to be more strategic in the way that we take that information. What do we adhere to, what resonates with us, and what do we just disregard as noise? It's that old thing, isn't it? Signal versus noise. What's the signal? What's the noise in the information that we receive? And that's where some of this cognitive fluency stuff can come in quite handy in our day-to-day lives. Because I like to give you all some practical tips rather than just talking about esoteric, philosophical, or psychological things that may be of interest to some. But how do we use that? How do we effectively take these ideas and bring them into our lives to make our lives slightly easier, which is what this is all about. So how does improving cognitive fluency, I was going to say efficiency, but I guess it's a similar vibe. How does improving cognitive fluency impact our lives in a beneficial way? So firstly, I'm going to give you a list because in the spirit of cognitive fluency, lists are simple and easy to remember rather than paragraphs and streams of consciousness, right? So item 1, efficient thinking and decision making. So the more fluently we can process information, the quicker and more efficiently we can make decisions. And that can be useful, particularly when we're working in high pressure, high stress, high risk environments. Think about people in the emergency services, for example. If you're a paramedic and you're thinking under stress and you've got all this information that you're getting about the context of the situation from your many senses, how do you process that information quickly to come to a useful solution that's going to be of benefit to the patient? That can massively improve how we respond to certain scenarios and the decisions we make within those scenarios. So efficient thinking and decision making. Item 2, enhanced communication. So better cognitive fluency helps us to understand and communicate ideas more effectively, which in turn makes us better at listening, better at speaking, and better at writing, because we're able to elucidate ideas that we have out into the world. We manifest them. They become psychedelic, the mind made manifest, out into the world, and we're able to communicate our ideas to others and receive ideas from others in a better way. it can improve our learning. Now, cognitive fluency has a really significant, as you are probably unsurprised to hear, a significant role in our learning process. Because the easier it is for us to process information, the more likely that we are to understand and retain it. We all know what it's like when we come across information that is left field or something that we're not interested in. How difficult is it to learn something that you really can't give a shit about? Because the mind just like, meh, it doesn't want to know. I find that. I don't know about yourselves. Maybe you could drop a comment in the chat. How do you feel? How easy is it for you to learn things that you have no interest in? Do you have any motivation? Anyway, I digress. Lastly, point number 4, reduced cognitive bias. So cognitive bias is our prejudice, essentially, the overlay of prejudice upon the information that we receive. So a good example of this is, let's say, and I'm not speaking from experience, this is purely an example. Let's say that you had a PE teacher. I went to school in the 80s, so, PE teachers were different back then. A PE teacher that was really brash and abrupt and took on that sort of like Full Metal Jacket drill sergeant vibe, and you really didn't like them. You dreaded their lessons. 20 years later, you go to work, and there is someone at work who subconsciously or subconsciously reminds you of this PE teacher, and you instantly dislike them. They could be a really lovely person, but your cognitive bias is, this person is like, the emotion comes back. The emotions of being in that gym class and being screeched at, 6 inches from your face. This gym teacher is there just screaming at you. Why is the water burnt? Yeah, that. So cognitive bias overlaying. So by understanding cognitive fluency, in this case, it can help us to mitigate cognitive bias because we can recognize a little bit of self-awareness that the emotions that we are feeling are not an appropriate response to the context of the present moment, because we're more critical of simple but incorrect explanations. Yeah, so it's like critical thinking, essentially. Cognitive fluency is a real supporter of critical thinking. Which segues nicely, I love that word segues nicely into talking about how we can improve cognitive fluency, critical thinking. So that's our ability to pragmatically observe what's going on and to process it with a certain detachment to the emotion behind it. So critical thinking enables us to think clearly and think rationally, and to consider the logical connection between information and ideas. So it should come as no surprise that practicing critical thinking can improve our cognitive fluency. And to practice critical thinking, we can do things like challenging the mind, essentially. So problem solving, puzzles, learning new skills, things that are going to push the mind outside of its comfort zone. So, get on the Wordle, whatever the fuck it is, or Sudoku or shit like that. I don't know. Does Candy Crush count? Might do. So critical thinking, practice critical thinking. That's important. The second is to expand your knowledge base. So the more information that you have about something, the better you are able to contextualize and understand it. So if you come across something that is related to something you already understand, cognitive fluency dictates that it's easier for you to process and to retain it and to think about it. So a good way to improve cognitive fluency is to read and to learn stuff and to go out and be interested, be engaged, be curious about the world. Go and find shit out. And that will just broaden your perspective, broaden your understanding. The more we understand, the easier it is for us to understand other things. Because we have context. We've come across these ideas, even if they're not the same, we've come across similar ideas before. And as we said earlier, the brain loves to absorb things that it can relate to, that are familiar. The mind loves familiarity. And that's a really, really good way for us to learn and to process and contextualize information. We can simplify things, which I know sounds really banal on the surface, but if you have a very complex idea that you're trying to solve, break it down into component parts and simplify it. Don't try and scale the mountain all in one go. Try and break it down into smaller, consumable chunks and then build up a broader picture. It makes it a lot easier for us to understand, to process. And lastly, I always throw this in, but I love it, and I think everybody should do it. And that's meditation. Meditation's great for the mind. It's great for the mind because it calms it down. And when the mind is calmer and we are less engaged in the emotional, then, we can take away some of that cognitive bias. We can get a bit more involved in critical thinking. And meditation is also good because it's not just sitting in a quiet room in the dark with your legs crossed. Meditation is an exercise in focus and concentration. So much in the same way as you go to the gym and you lift the weights and the muscles get bigger and stronger and you become fitter and more, the body becomes more efficient. So meditating does that for the mind. It makes the mind more efficient. It bolsters the mind. It strengthens the mind. So meditation, great way to improve cognitive fluency. And that's it today. That's all I have to say on the wonderful, slightly abstract, but quite interesting topic of cognitive fluency. As always, thank you for joining me. I wish you all a fabulous weekend. Go out and do some word puzzles and critical think about something, I don't know, abstract and unusual. Maybe meditate. Maybe break something down. Think about your prejudices, your cognitive bias. Why do you really dislike that neighbor's dog? Well, because it reminds me of that dog that bit my knee when I was a child. That is your task. Much love, and I will catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope that you found it useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writings or work around psychology and philosophy and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com, and that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll see you soon.